Don't skip this one. Each of the 8 facts builds on the last, revealing something deeper about how your mind works, and why it might be the most powerful force on this planet. If you want to truly understand yourself and others, watch this video all the way through. Sometimes it's not the first or the last truth, but the one in the middle that changes something inside you. If any fact sparks a thought, a feeling, or a memory, you haven't said a word, and yet you've already become someone else. There is a moment, brief and almost invisible, when you enter a room and your brain begins to adjust itself. Not to the temperature, not to the lighting, but to the people. To their gazes, to their expectations, to the emotional gravity in the air. Before you utter a single sentence, your mind starts calculating, who should I be here? And without your conscious permission, it shapes you accordingly. This isn't deception, it's adaptation. Carl Jung would say this is the psyche responding to the collective energy of a social field. We don't change because we're fake. We change because our brain understands, on a level older than thought, that identity is relational, that the person you become is, in part, a reflection of what the room demands. And so, sometimes you speak with a voice that's slightly more careful. You smile a bit wider. You shrink or stretch or soften. Not because someone told you to, but because something inside you reacted first. The body is the messenger. Before your mouth moves, your shoulders already decide if they will rise in defense or drop in surrender. Your eyes scan for danger, even in familiar faces. And in all this, there is a quiet intelligence at work. Not logical, not verbal, but ancient. Jung called this the persona, the mask we put on to meet the world. But even the mask, he believed, is not a lie. It is a survival strategy crafted by the unconscious. So when you think you are choosing how to act, ask yourself, how much of that choice was made before you arrived? This is not an accusation. It is an invitation to witness the precision of your own mind, to realize that your brain is not waiting for your approval. It is already shaping responses, already running simulations, already editing your reactions before you know you're reacting. And that is the first quiet miracle of the mind. It protects you, even when you're not watching, even when you're not fully yourself. It is trying to keep you safe by becoming what the moment needs. That power, to adjust, to absorb, to prepare, is not weakness. It's intelligence. But it's also a warning. If you never pause to ask what version of yourself has arrived, you may live your whole life speaking words that do not belong to you, because the brain does not wait for the soul to speak. It arrives early, puts on a coat that fits the weather and says, "This is who we are today." And most of us never question it. The most important decision is always made without you. There is a space within you that speaks before you do. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't announce itself. It simply moves between stimulus and response and leaves you to make sense of what just happened. We like to believe we are present in every moment of choice, but in truth, most decisions begin somewhere deeper, beyond where language lives. This is the room inside you. Not a metaphorical soul, not a mystical abstraction, but a real psychological mechanism. It processes emotion, tension, tone, and memory faster than conscious awareness. Jung described it as a layer of the psyche where personal experience merges with the collective. A place where your past meets the voice of others, where inherited fears and internalized instructions decide how you respond before you've even realized there was a question. You walk into conflict, and the room tightens. You hear a critical tone, and the room floods with old echoes. You're offered praise, and the room hesitates, unsure if it's safe to receive. None of this happens in your thoughts. It happens in the space between feeling and reaction. And the danger is this: the room is so practiced, so automatic, that you may forget it's there. This inner room is full of voices, but not always your own. Parents, teachers, early experiences, moments of humiliation or reward. They all left instructions. Some whisper, "Don't make it worse." Others shout, "If you don't respond now, you'll lose control." And without pausing to hear whose voice is speaking, you obey. You speak sharply or you retreat. You laugh too loudly or say yes too quickly. And you call it instinct. But instinct, Jung might argue, is only true when it is yours. What we often feel is not instinct, but programming. Repetition. Old instructions acting out in new situations. And until you step inside this room, look around, notice the furniture, recognize the portraits on the wall, you will keep reacting in ways that are not really yours. The room is not your enemy. It was built to protect you. But if you never update what it contains, it will defend you from things that no longer threaten you. It will mistake love for danger, vulnerability for weakness, stillness for failure. And then you will live a life of overreaction, not because you're unbalanced, but because the room is full of ghosts. So here is the invitation. Enter the room. Slow down. Before you react, ask, who answered for me just now? Whose rulebook am I following, and is it still true? Because no matter how intelligent your brain is, it cannot help you choose if you never stop to listen. And until you listen, the most important decisions will always be made without you. You think you're choosing until you realize you're choosing the same thing every time. You wake up and decide, or so you think, what to wear, how to speak, whether to say yes or no. But behind each decision, there's a path you've walked before. So many times, your feet don't need guidance. You don't choose, you remember. Not a memory in words, but one in reactions. A felt sense of what once kept you safe. And the more uncertain life becomes, the more you return to it. The brain does not search for freedom, it searches for safety. Jung knew this when he described our inner conflicts not as flaws, but as inherited patterns. Archetypal energies that live through us, quietly shaping our movements. The child who learned that silence earned love becomes the adult who cannot speak up. The teenager who learned that compliance meant safety becomes the colleague who agrees too quickly. The repetition feels natural, even virtuous. But it isn't choice. It's choreography. We believe we are autonomous because we have options. But choice is not the presence of options. It's the capacity to interrupt the familiar. Most people don't choose differently because the body prefers the known discomfort to the unknown possibility. There is security in the loop, a kind of loyalty to pain that helped you survive once. Brain remembers what worked, not what was right. And so you might move through relationships like you've moved through all the rest. Same compromises, same silences, same exhaustion, or you might take a new job only to play the same role. Invisible helper, polite observer, always reliable but rarely seen. You repeat not because you're incapable of change, but because the script runs deeper than awareness. Jung would ask, who is making the choice? The self or the persona designed to survive the past? The question is uncomfortable, because to accept that many of your decisions are simply reenactments is to accept that freedom is not a given, but a skill. And skills take time to build. But here lies the opportunity. Once you notice the loop, you're no longer fully inside it. The moment you ask, why do I always respond this way? A crack appears. And in that crack, light. Not clarity yet, but space. Space to hesitate, to try a different word, to sit in the unfamiliar and see what emerges. Freedom, then, is not loud. It does not announce itself with courage and fireworks. It arrives quietly, the moment you no longer rush to do what you've always done, when you let discomfort speak and don't silence it with action, when you allow the unknown to stand beside you without banishing it. Because the most powerful will is not the one that decides quickly, but the one that waits, questions, and dares to choose something new. There are memories you didn't choose to keep, but they chose you. Not everything you remember was invited. Some memories were never named, but they shaped your spine. They didn't arrive with clear images or tidy beginnings. They arrived through reactions. Tension in your jaw when someone raises their voice. A strange heaviness in your chest when a certain smell fills the room. An urge to leave when laughter becomes too loud. These are not stories you tell. These are stories that live inside your body. Jung once wrote that what remains unconscious will direct your life. And you will call it fate. Nowhere is this more evident than in the memories you never consciously recorded, but still carry. You don't recall the moment your nervous system decided that kindness was suspicious. Or the moment you started flinching at the sound of hurried footsteps, but your body does. The brain, in its brilliance, stores what threatens you, not because it wants to trap you, but because it wants to protect. It holds fragments of experience the way a city remembers a blackout. Not in words, but in shifted behaviors, in backup systems, in guarded routines. You might walk through life with certain patterns and never question their origin. You might avoid closeness, delay joy, sabotage calm, and tell yourself it's just who you are. But it isn't. It's who you had to become. The memory was never about content. It was about survival. And because you never gave it a name, it became a rule. A child isn't born mistrusting. A child learns to mistrust when trust leads to pain. And the lesson stays, often too long. Long after the context has changed. This is the paradox. Your brain protects you with the past, even when the present no longer justifies it. And yet, healing does not begin with forgetting. It begins with noticing. Jung believed that the unconscious becomes less dangerous the moment we turn toward it. The pain doesn't vanish, but it stops ruling you in the dark. When you feel a disproportionate reaction, an unexplained retreat, a tension that seems too old for the moment, pause. You're not overreacting. You're remembering. And in that remembrance lies your map. Not back into the past, but into integration. You don't have to relive it. You don't have to decode every detail. But you can start saying, this lives in me. It's not my fault, and I no longer need to follow it without question, because the memories you didn't choose chose you not to haunt you, but to be seen. And once seen, They soften, not into disappearance, but into a truth you can carry with clarity. Not confusion. Our brain understands what you never said and acts before you do. You grew up thinking that words were the main instrument of connection. You were taught to listen to what people say, respond politely, construct your feelings in neat, explainable sentences. But all along, your brain was absorbing something deeper. It was learning a language you never formally studied, the language of tone, space, stillness, and what hides in the breath between sentences. Before you spoke, you understood. The rhythm of a room, the tension in footsteps, the warmth in an unexpected glance. These weren't words. They were signals. And your nervous system, that ancient interpreter, never stopped translating. This language doesn't care for logic. It cares for survival. It notices when the voice says, "I'm fine," but the face tightens. It catches when the hug is a little too stiff, the silence a little too sharp. Long before you decide how to react, your body reacts. Your chest tightens. Your shoulders lift. You smile. Not because you feel safe, but because you've learned that smiling makes others less dangerous. Jung might have called this the wisdom of the unconscious, a knowledge that bypasses intellect and roots itself in pattern, not intuition as magic, but intuition as highly trained pattern recognition. Your brain isn't guessing. It's remembering millions of cues stored over years, guiding you without needing your permission. That's why some people exhaust you and you don't know why. Why a certain room feels heavy. Why a phrase, even when said kindly, lands with a thud. You're not being dramatic. You're perceiving what hasn't been spoken, and what's most surprising, your reactions often precede your awareness. This is what makes human connection so complex. Two people may speak the same verbal language, but one is fluent in subtext and the other is not. One hears discomfort in a pause. The other only hears silence. Misunderstandings don't start with disagreement. They start with different levels of perception. Your most accurate conversations aren't the ones filled with clever words. They're the ones where you feel seen before you've spoken, where someone reads your shoulders, not just your thoughts, where a pause is held, not filled. And the deeper truth is this. Your brain has always known how to read this language, but you were taught to distrust it, taught to focus on facts, not feelings, to explain, not perceive, to prioritize what's said over what's meant. But now you can return to that original fluency. You can trust the tightening in your stomach, the air in the room, the subtle flinch in someone's eyes. You can slow down, listen differently, not just with your ears, but with your nervous system. Because this language you never spoke, it has always been yours. And when you reclaim it, you don't just understand others more deeply. You begin to understand the version of yourself that has been speaking without words all along. Silence is not calm. The brain knows when you're still screaming. You've been praised for your calmness. People say you're composed, collected, a good listener. They think your silence is peace, but inside, you know better. What they see is a still surface. What they miss is the storm beneath. There is a difference between silence and calm, and your body knows it before your thoughts do. You sit in a meeting, hands folded, eyes steady, but your jaw tightens with every word spoken. Your breathing is shallow, your neck stiff. The mind nods in agreement while the body quietly resists. You weren't taught to name this. You were taught to perform calmness, to sit still when angry, to lower your voice when frustrated, to nod even when your gut screamed no. And the world rewarded you for it. But Jung would remind you, repression is not peace. It's simply a redirection of energy into the muscles, the organs, the breath you forgot to finish. True calm does not require stillness. It begins where the fight inside you ends. Not because you lost, but because you stopped pretending there was no fight at all. It's not the absence of thought, but the absence of contradiction. Think of those moments when you truly felt ease. Not quietness, but presence. A walk without headphones. A moment where you laughed without checking if it was appropriate. The time you didn't have to edit your sentence 3 times before speaking. That was calm, not choreographed, not performed. Real. Calmness is not being unaffected. It is being aware and choosing not to collapse. It is hearing the noise inside you and staying seated, not frozen, not suppressed, simply rooted. The most dangerous misunderstanding we inherit is that calm people feel less. Often, they feel more, but have learned to keep it private. And sometimes, in that privacy, they lose access to their own emotional truth. You've spent years mastering the art of appearing fine. What if instead you mastered the ability to know when you actually are? Not when you look okay, but when your breath deepens, when your spine uncoils, when your silence is not a shield, but a signal. I'm not fighting myself anymore. This is the beginning of real presence, not in how others see you, but in how your body, mind, and breath begin to agree. You were never weak. You just lived out of rhythm. There comes a moment not marked by fireworks or breakdowns, but by the quiet arrival of a new thought. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg for attention. It just appears like a line of light in a room you've spent years pacing in the dark. This thought doesn't need to be profound. It can be as small as, I don't have to say yes. Or, what if I'm not responsible for everyone's comfort? You don't cry. You don't smile. You just stop. And in that stopping, something shifts. The script that has governed your reactions, the way you answer before thinking, please before breathing, tense before touching, starts to feel optional for the first time. Jung often spoke of the unconscious as a deep structure, a narrative long set before our intellect arrived, but he also believed in the possibility of integration, that a single, deeply felt realization could begin to alter the system. The thought that rewrites you is not just psychological, it's physical. Your spine feels different, your breath moves differently, you speak, and the tone isn't apologetic. It's balanced, calm. Yours. You realize the things you blamed yourself for weren't flaws. They were consequences of misalignment. You were reacting from someone else's rhythm, from inherited urgency, and that urgency, to please, to anticipate, to obey, was never yours to carry. This part of the journey is not about grand decisions. It's about micro-shifts. You don't walk into the next conversation as the same person. You pause. You don't raise your shoulders. You hear something that once would have triggered you, and it passes. Not because you've numbed it, but because the root inside you has moved. It's terrifying, in a way. Who are you without your old reactions? Without the performance? But it's also freeing. You start noticing space where there was only tension before. Your body doesn't brace. Your thoughts don't spiral. You're not waiting to defend yourself, because you no longer believe you need to be defended. This is the quiet revolution, when awareness doesn't just stay in your head, but settles into your body. Not as resistance, but as rhythm, yours. There's a silence that once frightened you. It echoed like absence. You filled it with explanations, reassurances, distractions, anything not to hear yourself too clearly. But one day, without effort or announcement, you step into the same silence, and it no longer empties you. It shelters you. This room, inside your mind, has always been there. The place where nothing needs to be said, where no identity is performed, no roles, no posture, just presence. You sit down in it, not as a visitor, but as its rightful occupant. The brain, this extraordinary, mysterious architecture, has not been your enemy, only misunderstood. You tried to control it, correct it, mold it, but it was never chaos. It was complexity waiting to be met without fear. It was speaking in a language you never had time to learn, stillness. Jung once wrote that the task of individuation is not to become someone else, but to become truly who you are, to integrate all the pieces you've silenced, feared, or discarded. In this room, the voices soften. The inner critic no longer shouts, the frightened child no longer hides, the protector no longer scans. You breathe, nothing resists, not even you. You realize now, the goal was never control. It was collaboration. Your thoughts aren't intruders. Your patterns aren't prisons. They're old mechanisms, shaped by a time when you did what you could to stay safe. And now? Now you're safe enough to let go. This quiet room becomes a home when you no longer demand performance from yourself. You walk through life not braced, not waiting to react, but simply aware. This isn't numbness. It's clarity. This isn't detachment. It's depth. And perhaps the most beautiful thing is, nothing had to be added. No achievement, no breakthrough, just a shift in how you sit with yourself. The power of your mind was never in its noise, but in the moment it stopped fighting and started listening. That is where everything changes. Not outside, not in others, but right here, where you now sit, finally, at home.